I just think about that of every single day was a new day. We were learning something new, and that it was something, like I said, we were committed to. There was tension, but it was something worth doing. It was something significant.
Welcome back to In Residence. I'm Keith.
And I'm Laura.
Hey, Laura.
Hey, Keith.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good. What have you been up to?
Not too much, actually. Just a lot of work. I have spring break last week, so
Everyone had spring break. You
I
were
continue
working.
to work. I would say maybe one thing that I'm grateful to pass Laura for was I scheduled myself a massage appointment and a session in a salt cave. And so a little bit of intentional self-care. So that was fun. Felt very relaxed going into the weekend. How about you?
I went to the dentist going into the weekend.
Oh, that's right.
So I got a temporary crown. And so I'll have to go back in a couple weeks and get the crown, the permanent crown, as they said. And then I'll be a true king because I'll have a crown.
Yes. You're so lucky.
Yeah, it went fine. Couldn't feel anything because there's no nerves in that tooth.
It has been like, I don't.
Yeah. I was anxious though. I was tensed up. They're really nice though and helped me relax. But I was waiting for it to hurt and it didn't. So it's kind of funny.
Yeah. Can I say I also went to a movie yesterday with Kid 1 and Kid 2 and my parents. We went to Ghostbusters. That was a blast from the past for me. A lot of the former people were in it with cameos or different things. So it was interesting how the story wove together.
So the original cast made appearances.
Yes.
Okay. So you had a good time?
I did have a good time.
Cool. So while you were doing that, I was here playing with our new mics.
Yeah.
So we're going to see how this sounds. Hopefully it sounds good. I'm interested to see. So hopefully we don't get all the way through this and be like, that sound is horrible. But it's looking good on the screen and stuff. So
we will see. Well, you will see.
Yeah.
When you start editing.
We'll hear.
There you go. So what do you want to talk about today?
That is the question that we've been thinking about, right? I've been taking in more things over the last week. Watched a few master classes / listened while I was doing stuff. I was taking some time to take things in, because that's like how we notice things and think of ideas, right? And I'm like, why am I not, like, they're all great. Like everything I've been taking in and like listening to or watching, it's been great, but nothing like stood out. So we've been kind of feeling like a little bit of that pressure, right?
We
keep just asking, like, I'll be like, so what's your idea for this week?
Well, what's your idea?
I asked you first.
But didn't you say, and I take that and I give it right back to you?
Yeah.
I think is what you said.
And I said, boing.
You did say boing.
I'm like, I'm going to bounce this right back to you. I'm like, I asked you first. So all that to say, last night to get to bed, I tend to put on either a podcast or a book. And I put on Seth Godin's Song of Significance. A lot of times it's that or The Practice, his other more recent book, because I know them pretty well. And I learn something every time I listen or remember something that I'm like, oh, that's really, really good to hear. I also know it, so then I can kind of drift off and I know I can come back to it. So I put on Song of Significance, just picked it up, press play wherever it was. And the chapter it started with was, Where Does the Water Go? And I listened to it and then fell asleep. Today again, we're like, what are we going to talk about? While you were doing your run, I grabbed my AirPods and threw on a podcast, and I went to Seth's Akimbo podcast. And I picked the most recent one that was re-released. It was called Friction. I was like, okay, cool. Because I'm actually feeling some friction right now. I don't know what to talk about. This will be good. And I press play, and the first thing he's talking about is that same anecdote.
Oh, really?
About when you push the water, where does it go? Like paddling a canoe. And I'm like, okay, this is within 12 hours, right? And I'm like, there's something here. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about is friction and maybe tension, I think, is going to kind of come up because the pressure is what I'm feeling to come up with a topic. And I think it's because anything I'm thinking about, I'm like, well, is that good enough kind of comes in. And what I realize is I need to lean into this friction that I'm feeling to get somewhere. And I think it's going to keep coming up. So I might be calling out what we're going to talk about before we actually talk. I think we should start by listening.
Sounds good.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to play it for you.
Okay.
71. Where does the water go? When paddling a canoe, you'll see little whirlpools as the paddle moves backward and the canoe advances. So, when you push the water back, where does it go? The answer is not as simple as it seems. The water can't go backward. It can't go backward because that would mean that your paddle pushes this water, which pushes that water, which pushes the other water all the way to the shore. Each stroke would have to move 50,000 pounds of water. In fact, the water doesn't go much of anywhere at all. We move. The water is a heavy substance, practically a solid mass. We use the water to leverage ourselves and our boat forward. We don't change the lake that much. The lake responds to our effort by changing us.
I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I've never actually thought about where the water went.
So that's an excerpt from Song of Significance, which came out in 2023.
Right.
And the podcast is from 2019. And he makes a point of saying, you probably haven't even thought of this. And I'm like, you're right, I haven't.
I listened to a podcast this week with, I believe it was Tim Ferriss and Seth.
Oh, that's right. You told me that you listened to that. I'm like, it's on my queue. I've been meaning to listen to it, but I had to get like the podcast done. I'm so jealous you listened to it already.
And I think something that they talk about in there, if I'm remembering correctly, is the idea of sometimes you need to create tension to sorry, that was really funny. You're just like trying to like come out of your sweatshirt.
It shouldn't pick up on your mic anymore.
No, it was just funny to watch
Not
it like,
that you care. Yeah.
like anyway.
I had to shed it. I'm hot now.
So Seth was talking about, if I'm remembering correctly, the reason why sometimes it's important to stop doing things once they become easy or routine, or he didn't say this, but kind of stale. It's important because you no longer have that tension to leverage to move stuff forward. And so creating new projects, doing something you've never done before, he was talking about how he has used that to really leverage and push himself forward to do so much more than he would have if he just stayed with his first, like one of his first roles, making, was it video games?
Yeah.
Or like computer games?
Computer video games.
Yeah. That's what that's reminding me of. Instead of being scared of the tension, can you actually go out and seek to create the tension to propel yourself forward? Kind of like what you do with a canoe, right?
Exactly.
And you're
the oars are levers, right?
Right.
That move you forward. That's like the metaphor he's using.
I can't believe I didn't think about that part of that podcast and talk to you about that yet.
Oh, yeah.
But it came up for me as you were playing that.
Because like in my head, when I listened to that part of the book and then the podcast, the Akimbo podcast this morning, is I'm realizing that I'm bumping up against friction. And I think I've probably talked about it over the last few weeks too, of feeling like I'm not going anywhere, not doing enough. And when am I going to level up? And when am I can do more? Why am I not doing more? And I mean that in the most kind way to myself of like, I feel like there's more that can be done. And I'm bumping up against resistance to that. And now thinking about leverage and friction as the mechanisms that I know they are, and yet I'm still not utilizing them, or I'm seeing the friction or the tension more as pressure, that's more something to keep me from moving forward. Whereas the possibility in tension is that you move forward. That's really what caught my ear when I heard it. I'm like, okay, I just heard two things that are talking about the same thing, which is moving forward. And I don't feel like I am. I'm kind of been doing the podcast for almost 6 months now, and I'm trying to figure out what's going to make it get to that next level. And so that's, I think, why it stuck out to me is I've been thinking this, but almost afraid to acknowledge it, because then I have to step up. I have to step forward. I have to make a choice to do something. And so I kind of called myself out, using Seth to call me out, like while I was falling asleep, and then pretty much while I was waking up today.
You talked about pressure. Do you see pressure and friction as the same thing?
No.
So talk to me about pressure a little bit. What do you think about when you feel like you have pressure?
Pressure feels negative, like it's going to be stress.
Okay.
The opposite of stress is tension. And so I try to be aware of if something's stressing me out, that is time for me to step back and figure out how do I ease that. Whereas if something's slightly uncomfortable and it's tension, I take that as a signal of, and I know I've said it before, but like pulling a bowstring back.
Mm-hmm.
Like you create tension there so that you launch forward. And so that's leverage too. And so that's what, like, the leverage thing came up of moving the boat. The other thing that comes up is Nick Offerman's like paddle your own canoe.
Mm-hmm.
And that, like, I'm not doing something completely original, but I'm doing something original to me and something I've never done before. And that's kind of like I'm paddling my own canoe. So I gotta remember, how do I take what I have and leverage it, my skills, and how do I level up those skills and my talents and get the boat moving a little more. I equate pressure and stress to be similar, whereas like I'm trying to put this kind of more happier connotation around tension. We tend to kind of conflate them all, and when we feel resistance, we step back and say, oh, that's bad and that's uncertain. And what I'm trying to do is look at those different signals with a little more discerning eye, so that I don't constantly hesitate or pull back and not make progress.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I conflate tension and call it stress, when really what all it is I just need to choose. I need another thing that comes up later in the Song of Significance is commitment and responsibility.
Right.
So that's on me to take ownership of those things and realize that nothing's going to move forward if I don't choose to act and choose to be committed and be clear about my intentions. And it's okay that it's not happening instantaneously. I think that's where a lot of pressure comes from, is like when my time frame doesn't match reality, I need to keep being mindful and reflecting upon where I started and where I am, versus eye on the prize. Sometimes you forget how far you've come because it still feels so far away of where you want to go. So the time I've been spending over the last few months reflecting and doing more journaling has really helped me breathe and realize slow and steady progress is progress. I don't need to hit a home run, just need a base hit.
Right. Gotta get on the base. I like that you're reframing it. That's helpful to move things forward. I'm still curious about pressure. Sometimes I know I've always said about myself that I'm very deadline driven.
Mm-hmm.
I see tension and some pressure important to get things moving and get them done. I procrastinate on some things because I find that if I procrastinate, then the time pressure I put myself in gives me that ability to be like, okay, it's now or never, go. What?
That makes me think of, there's another great point that Seth writes about. I can't remember if it's in a blog or in a book, about approaching the red line. That's kind of what that reminds me of, is you have no choice but to do it because there's no time left. And so therefore you're going to get close to this red line, and it's real dangerous, and it's also very seductive. It's more of, so how about we just never go near it and just realize like we're going to get it done kind of thing. I think you and I are different. You're drawn to the deadline because that propels you forward.
Well, it helps me prioritize too.
Yeah. And I think I maybe come from, the thing that makes me procrastinate is the quality. And if I don't have the time to do it right, I may never start. So me waiting to hurry up and get it done at the last minute, it's like a 10x more stressful. Then I'm stressed out because I'm rushing and it's not good enough for a lot of things. But what I'm learning is I'm recalibrating what good enough is and how okay it is for a lot of things to be good enough.
Well, it's almost like trying to get away from like a shark with a canoe with a paddle that's like partially cracked or something like that.
What is?
Like what you're talking about, where it's almost like too much, like pressure is almost too much.
Yeah,
to produce the result that you're seeking.
I get overwhelmed. I think easily or easier, or that's how I interpret those types of pressures. Whereas you're a little more like, well, this is all the time I have. Let's go. Let's rock and roll
and
get it done. I think it has to do with my awareness in the way that I'm aware. That's not a brag. That's something I made note of actually earlier that I thought maybe would be another thing to bring up another time. But I'm so aware of what may go wrong or think I'm aware that I'm so aware of what I'm aware of that I can be blind to maybe other people or what they maybe need or what they're aware of. And that's really something I want to be better at of not, do you know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Because you're around me a lot.
No, I do.
The hyper awareness and that married with a high standards, right? Of it good enough. Like my good enough is high.
Yes, it is.
And so I think there's something there that I need to work through and reconcile, I guess. I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling a lot.
The reason I'm bringing it up is I'm trying to parse out what is healthy tension that can allow you to propel forward.
Yeah.
And what is, I don't want to say unhealthy tension, but that's pressure tension.
That's stress to me.
You're right. That is almost like you poured cement in a lake and you can't quite move.
Yeah.
It almost, what is that? The possums that play dead, where they're just like,
playing possum. Yeah.
And they just like fall over, right?
You just freeze. Yeah.
You just freeze.
It's fight, flight, or freeze, right?
Right. Because it's too much. So you might as well play dead.
Yeah.
That's your
and that's the thing.
Chance.
So that's where it's individual. You need the awareness. Oh, I feel stressed out, or is it tension or stress? That's really important to be able to notice that, because then you can react and make adjustments. So like I brought up, timelines can make me very stressed out because of the way I interpret the scope of a project. My idea of how much time I need may not align with like what you think, right? And then we kind of have a little friction that's more than we need about how it's going to get done, and then who's got the time to do that.
It's fair. I mean, even thinking about this weekend, we're going to be hosting Easter for our families.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing I started thinking about today was, we got to clean the house. I have to get groceries and figure out what are we eating. We have to decide, do we do an egg hunt or not, or some games for the kids?
Mm-hmm.
Something.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably going to be snowing here, so probably not an egg hunt, but is there some activities other than just video games or having them go and hang in the basement, which actually I think they enjoy more than anything we put together for them? I've been thinking about that, where it sounded like a really amazing idea, and it still sounds really fun to me, but I have been thinking, we have to get the house ready for that. And so you're probably looking at me right now going, yep, and you work all week.
Mm-hmm.
So Saturday will be all things prep. whether we want to or not.
Or we can do a little bit every day on our way
See,
to the weekend.
That's true. We have the tension to create a magical Easter.
The possibility.
The possibility. I like that better.
Yeah.
I like that better. Didn't mean to go like completely party planning on you there. I know I'm stuck on tension versus pressure. I keep putting those together because they're different.
You go back and read some of my dailies and you'll get it sorted out.
Okay. Sounds good. But I do keep going back and thinking, what is the difference? But I wonder, so when I think about pressure, right, if you take coal and you add a lot of pressure to it, you create a diamond. But if you add pressure in that way to everything, you don't always create a diamond.
Correct.
Right? I mean, you might create rubble or something very, very squished. I don't know. Tension, though, the idea of moving forward, it almost feels like when you were talking about the importance of commitment and committing, it's almost like tension and that commitment really do need to go hand in hand. Because I keep going back to that idea of you purposely create tension for the purpose of propelling yourself forward. Where pressure, you might be using it as a tool to hopefully create something beautiful or create a pile of rocks. So I think there's something really interesting there about the commitment factor of using this tension tool to propel forward. Do you find when you're using tension, do you always see that you are committed to moving forward and that's why it's helpful? Or do you not see it as clearly as that?
I don't know if I always see it clearly, but when I recognize the tension, which I'm seeking to do more and more and be more aware, when it is simply something for me to lean into versus stress, which is different. If I'm stressed out about going to the dentist, I need to do something to change my state so that I don't like hyperventilate, on the way to the dentist. So for me, what that is literally at the dentist office is I say, I know you get this all the time, but I get stressed out and anxious when I come to the dentist. And they're like, oh, we're going to take good care of you. And it releases the stress. And now I realize it's not as stressful anymore. I still feel it, but to me now it's a little bit more tension. Now I have the tension. I need to break it by using my voice and saying something like, hey, I'm kind of uncomfortable. I just want you to know that as we go into this. And then we're kind of like on the same team. If they were to say like, well, that's too bad because we're going to grind on your teeth, that wouldn't help, right? They're there to relieve the tension for me. The signal can feel the same for me, stress or tension. Where I'm trying to become more in tune is finding out the difference sooner and sooner. And so on the tension, I'm finding out a lot more that it's more tension, and tension is more positive to me. I get that like too much tension's bad too, right? Get that.
Right.
Too much of anything isn't great. Tension or stress, right? But so in my brain, to help differentiate between the good pressure and the bad pressure, if it's good and going to help me move forward, I call that tension. If it's the negative kind, I call that stress. I'm trying to pick up on the signals of which is which sooner, trying to reprogram myself to lean in to using the signal for tension as if I'm afraid of talking on the podcast about a topic, that's a signal that maybe it's just what I need to talk about. Or if it's stressing me out too much to talk about, it's like, well, maybe that's something for me and you to have a private conversation about, or just me to journal about. I still need to address it. It just maybe needs to be in a different way.
Not in a very public forum.
Correct. Appropriate tension. That's a key distinction that
Ooh, I like
Seth
that a
talks
lot.
about. Yes.
Okay.
And he uses that with connection too, making appropriate connections. You don't want to spam people. That's not being generous. An appropriate amount of tension to get the job done, to get me from where I am to where I want to go. Whereas the signal used to just be to stop. if it felt hard or it felt like it might not succeed. Right? Like that's the work we've been doing over the last several years of moving forward means some things are going to be hard because it wouldn't be worth it if it wasn't, kind of thing.
One thing you and I have been talking about this week, our intentions and schedules that we use to set ourselves up to do those things. We checked in briefly with each other just about the word of the year that we picked. So yours was
intention or intent.
Yep. And mine was strength.
Forgot about that. That was an idea I had earlier. And I'm like, that seems good and also not as exciting.
Right.
But now it makes sense.
But now that I'm thinking about it more, we had the words, we've been doing some of the things, but I will admit what I've been doing has been moving forward at my pace, but not really creating a plan to have that tension consistently be applied week to week. So one thing I listened to this week, masterclass with Martha Stewart. Of course, it's been an ad that's popping up for me of it's never too late to build your empire. I'm like, oh, Martha Stewart. Mm-hmm. But it was really, really interesting to listen to her and hear about the different way and the rigor she goes about with setting up her day, her morning routine, which I know I've talked a lot about mine here, but her morning routine, weekly routine, her business routine, and how she schedules herself and how she keeps it all together and moves multiple things forward. I thought, whoa, I can have more intention in how I'm setting up my schedule to really propel myself forward to achieve the goals that I have for myself. I thought that was really a good thing for me to hear and lean into a little bit. You were talking about, without even knowing I had listened to this, but you had also talked about your schedule and trying to figure out how do you have more intention with it. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. One thing that is coming up that I feel like I had a conversation like this, or maybe you've heard this somewhere. Intention. So tension plus commitment equals intention to me.
Okay.
I'm creating tension to do something and I need to commit to it if I'm going to get it done. And been trying to do that, but like you said, I maybe not quite as committed. I can't tell if I like I'm committed to it, but am I taking the appropriate steps to make progress? And that's where I feel like I'm not being quite as accountable or responsible with my intention. That's probably why I'm having a hard time coming up with ideas to talk about on the podcast, is because I maybe feel a little bit like I'm not working hard enough or not making enough progress.
Even though you're shipping a podcast every week and getting it done and shipping it at the timeline you've committed to, you still don't feel like you're doing enough.
It feels like I've stalled, to call back to what you were talking about from, I think, Seth and Tim's podcast. I've kind of plateaued.
Okay.
And so when am I going to level up? Like, what's the next thing? That's the more, I don't want more to feel daunting. I want it to feel like more of an impact. How is it going? Like, the podcast can continue like this indefinitely. I've proven I can do what we've done.
Yeah.
But I think it can be better. There can be more of an impact from our efforts. That means I need to do more. I mean, it's that simple. I need to choose to do those things. And the things I'm not choosing to do are because they probably make me uncomfortable, which is being more visible. We've talked about that over and over. So that's kind of where I'm at with intention, I guess. I'm in tension. I need to leap, I need to leap forward. What did we talk about last time is just making the smallest little thing the next thing to check off. So that brings up, you said something earlier that made me think of, like, with your running is what popped in my head. but you're building the habit
Mm-hmm.
of somebody that runs, however many days a week or whatever days of the week. And that's building a streak and leaning into the power of that, of not missing a shot or a no hitter, right? Or that comes back to like gamifying it, right?
Right.
But there's a power in that. And so I have a streak going with the podcast right now. We haven't missed a week since September. So now it's like, that's not as big of a deal anymore. I want it to be it's going to be a bigger deal because I want it to be better. So I need to kind of find that lever point, and I need to lean on it. And that's really what it comes down to, is I have to choose to do something or it's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm. So what's stopping you?
Myself.
Why do you think that might be, if you had to guess?
It's fear.
Fear?
Yeah. It's always that. The self-doubt and all that stuff. It's not going to be good enough. Da, da, da. It's all the same old stuff. That's why I can answer. Like, I can answer like that when you say, what's the problem? It's like, it's me. I'm stopping myself before I start.
So thinking about something, but not just the podcast, but thinking about just in general, have you ever had a time when you look back and you're like, whoa, okay, I really did use appropriate tension to propel myself forward?
I don't know if I use tension. I identify it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't create tension on purpose, and I think that's part of the problem.
Mm.
I avoid tension. And so I need to get better at being the one that pulls the lever that's going to wind up something that's going to release. I mean, a lot of, like, that's why I call you my initiator.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're the hot sauce, right? So that, I mean, that's something I'm aware of, and I probably need to be more intentional about becoming better at it.
I'm thinking back right now of something that we didn't know how to do as a couple. We jumped in.
Like having kids?
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. You're never ready, right?
You're never ready. And I remember we were going to be parents, and we were excited and committed to doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And we were also
so young and dumb.
No, but we were young and we didn't know what we didn't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Gosh, it must have been when we were maybe in the hospital with child one. And I had babysat some and things like that. So I kind of knew. And I remember teaching you how to change a diaper. Do you remember that?
So I knew I could have struggled through it, I'm sure, but I probably wanted to do it right. So I'm like, you better show me.
Yeah. And now, could you ever imagine?
Changed so many diapers.
I know you did. I just think about that, of every single day was a new day. We were learning something new, and that it was something, like I said, we were committed to. There was tension, but it was something worth doing. It was something significant for us as a team, as partners, to go through and to figure out together. And we didn't have it 100% right every time. We still don't. And we lean into it and lean on each other to work through those parts when it's hard. We would split the day, or like the nights, to try and leverage each other's strengths as well. So you would stay up until...
I was on call until 3.
Yep.
Because I was usually up until 1 or 2.
Anyway, so your day got extended.
Yeah.
And I was normally up around 5. And so then I got up earlier.
If you needed to.
If I needed to.
Yeah.
And so we tried to figure out, how do we work through this in a way so we can both have some self-care, but also make sure our new little human was thriving and taken care of.
Yeah. So, okay. So now you're starting to make it sound like we are actually making a little bit of sense. Because...
Okay.
Well, that's us identifying each other's strengths.
Right.
And leaning on those. And just being clear of like, well, why would we give Keith the morning shift when he doesn't normally wake up until 9 o'clock?
Correct.
Because he worked overnights for so many years. He's just programmed to do it differently, I think that comes back to awareness, right? So the words of the day are what? Like friction, leverage, awareness, commitment, tension, intention, right? Like it all goes hand in hand. But the biggest thing that helps me work through most of that stuff is being aware of what's happening inside of me and outside of me. And that's, I think, what's serving me the most over the last few years, probably because I became a parent, that I started having to pay attention in a different way.
Yeah. Once you think you have it figured out,
They change.
Well, they change, but then also child 2 was very different.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, almost night and day.
Yeah, they have some very strong personalities that are different.
Very different.
Like they complement each other.
In a good way.
Yeah. But it is almost comical how different they are.
Yeah, and what worked for child 1 didn't work for child 2.
Yeah.
And vice versa.
Do we ramble on enough?
What do you think?
I think so.
Okay.
Should we wrap up with what we've been listening to, reading, or watching?
That sounds good.
I know we mentioned several things throughout the episode, but what do you got, Laura?
I started to dig deep into the masterclass catalog.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Martha Stewart one I really did enjoy. I also enjoyed the one by Anna Wintour.
Who's that?
She is the editor for Vogue and then currently Condé Nast. So really in the fashion scene and things like that. It was good. The other thing that I listened to that I know I mentioned, but was the Tim Ferriss and Seth Godin podcast. I really enjoyed that. I thought it was interesting and challenged me a little bit to not just be complacent, but to really think about how can I move forward with the things that I say I want to move forward with. So I would recommend those. How about you?
So I hopped on Masterclass because you were talking about it. And so even though we have different profiles, it popped up what you were watching, I think. And so there was one by the founder of Bumble.
Yeah, that one was good too.
That was really good. So I had that on in the background while I was like doodling or something. And it was very captivating. And then I also just maybe Seth's book, The Song of Significance, just because that's kind of what inspired me to talk about stuff today. It's a great book. It's a great listen. And the Akimbo podcast, like diving back into that. It's been a while since I've listened to it because they're re-releasing them. And so I think I've already listened to them all a couple times, but it always brings up something good for me to think about. Anything else?
One thing, maybe just a shout out, the UW River Falls women's hockey team won the Division III national championship last weekend. So that was a blast. So go Falcons.
Yeah.
We're proud alum. I just wanted to do maybe a quick shout out there.
That was a lot of fun to watch.
Super fun.
All right. Let's get out of here.
Sounds good.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
This is turning into like another Seth quote fest, which is fine because he usually helps me understand myself better than I can alone. What he says, like the world's as normal as it's ever going to be. It's never going to be like this again.
It's true.
The possibility.
I'm sorry, I can't. No.